Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this presentation is titled TWA Flight 514 on December 1st, 1974. This accident led to 3 safety enhancements. Now, this flight was bound from Indianapolis to Washington National. And Washington, the whole East Coast was having a really bad weather day. And Washington National, as you know, is a short 8,000-foot runway north-south. And they were having wind gusts of approximately 28 knots. That's 32 miles per hour out of the east, and it was gusting to 49 knots. And you just can't land in National on conditions like that. So they divert them over to Dulles. Now, it's situations like this where things always get to be kind of hairy. You know, you're getting into a fuel situation, and Dulles, it's a little bit of ways away. You know, you got to have sufficient fuel, and usually you do, especially if the weather's bad. You're going to have sufficient fuel, but you've got to divert. And everybody's diverting, and it gets complicated, and you got to get the approach plates out, and you got reconfigured. And I remember this accident very well because I was a student in the Air Force, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But unfortunately, as they were being radar vectored to the approach, they were coming in at 7,000 feet, and they were cleared for the approach. Now, at the time, this is interesting, at the time, there was confusion over what it meant when you were cleared for the approach. And that was cited in the accident investigation because the controllers had one thought and the pilots were a little confused on this. They had other thoughts, and it wasn't really terribly clear. Unfortunately, all 92 people on board this aircraft were killed. They were being vectored. They got into a little discussion about, well, what does it mean to be cleared for the descent? They thought that they could immediately descend to the final approach segment of the approach, and they were over by a point known as Mount Weather, which is a very interesting point. It is an area that has a secret underground location structures. I think it's not secret anymore. Even when I was flying in there, it was kind of a sensitive thing. But, you know, if we got nuclear war or disaster, the first thing you want to do is get all the politicians safe, because Lord knows that if we lose, we have mass problems. You want to make sure those politicians are safe so the government can continue running in the wonderful fashion that it runs. And hopefully anybody listening to this presentation 20 years in the future will be going, what do you mean? The government runs wonderfully. Well, that's going to be good because I don't think that's happened for over 200 years. But anyway, I digress. Okay, so they were cleared for the approach and they're thinking, okay, we can descend. Well, they couldn't. They couldn't descend, and you can't descend until you are on a segment of the approach, and that was clarified. And there's what we call TWA ridge out there, and the interesting thing is, shortly before this also, United Airlines came very close to hitting this ridge, and nobody told anybody about it, and that's one of the safety enhancement of the thing. And, you know, like I said, there was concern on who was responsible. Well, they hit an outcropping of rocks. They hit the trees first, and they went through that about 500 feet. They hit it at a 1-degree angle. It was a very slight descent, but they hit the trees, but then they hit the rocks. And that's when the airplane just, of course, came apart. Rocks and airplanes don't go over well, and everybody, unfortunately, was killed. Now, I remember this very well because I was a T-37 student, and we had, in our instrument section of our manuals, we had to make a pen and ink change. Well, all pen and ink changes are made in pencil, okay? That's the Air Force. All pen and ink changes are made in pencil. And we had to write in very laboriously long sentence that, you know, and basically until you're on a published segment of the approach or a segment of the approach, you cannot descend. So that was clarified, and apparently it wasn't very clear before. So that was the first thing that was brought to light on this flight, on this accident, was to really clarify what it means when you're cleared for the approach. And also ground proximity warning systems. This is when they were mandated for commercial airliners. And this system has prevented thousands, if not tens of thousands of deaths, as long as it isn't ignored, which was a little problem early on, and there were false warnings early on too. Like any system, you try to get the thing working and you got problems. Until you put it in the fleet, you don't know what the problems are. It was like when we were testing the F-16, I digress, when we were testing the F-16 out at Edwards Air Force Base back in the late 70s, we never lost an airplane, but once it went operational, they were virtually falling out of the sky. So there's no easier way to find out the problems in a system than to hand it over to a bunch of second lieutenants, because the test pilots, they handled a lot of situations that may not have been handled quite as well. But yeah, once it comes operational, that's when you really find the problems. So, number one was specifying procedures to be more clear. Number two was GPWS. And number three was the Aviation Safety Reporting System. Now, anybody who's a pilot knows about this. This is the, I kind of screwed up inadvertently. I may have filed one or two or three of these in my career. But this is basically, yeah, I screwed up. I didn't mean to screw up. And it's kind of a get out of jail card unless you did something egregiously wrong, violated FARs and things like that. But if you made a mistake, and you kind of want to bring it to attention that, hey, maybe somebody else could make this mistake too. Which if United Airlines had reported that and it had been, widely decimated, or had gotten people's attention, or maybe somebody would have said, hey, there might be a little confusion over what controller thinks and what pilots think, and maybe we need to clarify that. So this system, of course, has done a lot of good, and it has saved a lot of lives. So from this one accident, probably one of the most, I hate to say beneficial accidents, but it brought about a lot of safety initiatives that have been very beneficial to the flying public. Easy for me to say. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting and informative.